Welcome to Crystal Mom and the Worst Babysitters in the World. The conclusions and myths of the realm dragged me back from the hells, partly because this video was requested and partly because I have a few things to say. Gentle reminder that this is a lore chat format, which means these are just opinions. My days of meticulously researching and sourcing ended with the Venat series. Also, this is a critical channel. It's in the description. There are plenty of outlets to find glowing praise of 14's story if that's what you prefer. Well, it was the most obvious plotline of the 12 just being another group of ancients. It was the first and simplest theory from 5.2 that they wouldn't be a convocation parallel, just Venat's simps. We now have more lore about random ancients than about some convocation seats. I also didn't appreciate them having a way to remember the precise lives of her followers when that was a struggle for the unsundered Asians. Emmett suffered for millennia almost entirely alone because Elidibus lost his memories and La Brea lost his mind, while the 12 casually remember their entire ancient lives. Part of the problem with this story is Venat's faction is vague on their setup and timeline, probably due to detailing it making it worse. What we did get only backs my theory that Venat's followers were easily misled. She withheld enough information that she must have sounded like a live, laugh, love cult leader. Realistically, she probably convinced them to turn against their colleagues by lying to them, which again goes against her claim that she has no ill will towards the convocation. Do you not find it suspicious how in at least 4 cases, Venat turns subordinates to people in positions of power against everyone? The candidates for Pashtara and Azim, Menfina under La Brea, and Biragat under Hydaelyn. If I were trying to subvert a society, that's how I'd do it. I think she must have ramped up fear of Zodiark undermining their species and sold visions of how the new life could all be exciting, plucky little familiars like you. She just believes she knows better than everyone else and is best off handling what will be a genocide by herself. It's quite conceited when you think about it. I thought Menfina, being a former Words of La Brea who came up with how to bind Zodiark, was some nonsense, especially given he was more than likely his design, though I'm amused by the thought that Venat killed her and then took credit for figuring out how to seal him. Save for the Watcher, Althic, and Nymea, we've never heard of any of the 12's origins, despite their historical importance. Even Alkaios and Myra were kind of backside pulls, unless you believe that them being good ancients implicitly meant that they would be on Venat's side. At least they left Charmian unsullied. Nald Thal being a literally who is also egregious because I think everyone was expecting something else, namely a nod to Emmett and Hyth. Suddenly artists everywhere dropping them from their fan art. They're all throwaway characters with a single line of lore because the writers decided all their previous mythology was null and void. Azima turned out to be an Azim fangirl, which, to be fair, I'm at least glad she didn't turn out to be a Venat self-insert, because I honestly wouldn't have put it past her. Thaleia is said to have been the headmaster of Academia Uniter, to whom no known phenomena existed in which he wasn't versed. So, Dynamis? Except his name never comes up in Academia Uniter, its data logs, nor are there any other references to it in Amarat, which is odd for someone so important. The Hyth slander with Biragat was bizarre and seemed an odd stance to inject to make one of the 12 look better. Personally, I loathe the Chaos Gremlin character trope. It was bad enough being applied to Azim, so to have it retroactively applied to Hyth too when he seemed normal and grounded is aggravating. Hyth has always been shown to be serious and responsible under his carefree and silly facade. This is the same man who was the first pick for the seat of Emmett Selk, who volunteered to sacrifice himself during the final days, knowing he couldn't help much aside from offering his life. You don't get to turn someone like that into a mockery, especially when none of the 12 sacrificed themselves to stop the final days. It just seems like an attempt to make ancient leadership appear incompetent. Meanwhile, you have Nathaka saying about the elementals, at times they may seem excessive in their actions, but it is out of an abundance of love, so pray be good to them and heed their warnings. I would say it's a bold maneuver for her to imply Gridania is right for being racist to Duskwights and Moon Makode, but it is frankly on brand for Hydaelyn and for these writers who don't know or care about pre-existing lore. We just needed to have Halone say Thornton meant well, he did it out of love, and he's a bit like Venat, with Rhalgr advocating for Ilberd in a similar way. I don't think Hydaelyn should have had any hand in the 12. They should have been either a spontaneous phenomenon born of memories of ancient times, like the Convocation, or Ascian efforts to try to assist the Sundered before realizing it's hopeless, perhaps substituted with the corrupted primals as gods. Given how they handled it, it neither flatters Venat nor does it make me sad to see them gone, although I did end up being fond of Derek. We still don't have an answer for what Azem was doing while these factions were warring over the fate of the star, and to be clear, I'm thankful for that, because whatever these writers would produce would be worse than nothing. However, the story basically has them gloating about winning to the sundered version of the person who wouldn't join them. There's always a bit of sinister surrounding anything Hydaelyn. There's also the remaining question of whether or not Venat's entire faction were really only 13 people. The Watcher is still going on about the new life when Venat never cared about that. Her eyes were on the prize of the Sundered. Whenever the Watcher brings up this new life, be it in the Omega quests or this raid series, he always refers to the Sundered rather than anything that was to be sacrificed in the third sacrifice. I'm more convinced than ever that she deceived them into believing new, sapient life would evolve and to let nature reclaim the world, while secretly intending the new life to be the ancient shattered remains. It's also bad writing that makes Venat look even worse, not that I should have expected any differently. Whatever their credentials in life, the 12 were gullible enough to fall for her rhetoric. Venat didn't want people relying on Zodiark, so she wiped out all life, installed herself as a supreme deity, and created a pantheon of gods so the Sundered could rely on her teachings instead. Nothing is fixed at the end of the quest series either. Mankind still has to pray to an autonomous faith converter to fulfill the 12's purpose in their absence, lest Venat's mess cave in on itself. What happens if people stop believing in gods? When will this story admit that Venat made mistakes? This also sounds like not only something that could go horribly wrong in the future for multiple reasons, but why wasn't this a solution to funneling ether into Zodiark to slowly release all the souls within him? It's a ridiculous plot contrivance, then again, Endwalker in a nutshell. Even Eulogia's triple triad card is contradictory. It says, an amalgam of the 12, Eulogia embodies the love and magnanimity the gods harbor towards mortals. This divine entity presents the 12's final challenge, delighting in the evidence of man's potential to thrive in a world divested of deities. Except the implication here is that mankind requires religion to be stable, which is a hell of a stance to take for a myriad of reasons. We have Graha asking what would the world do without the comforting lie, and Kryl eager to maintain it. A stark contrast to how matters were handled in Heaven's Ward. The writers have gone scorched earth on anything to believe in within the world's setting. The Watcher says, knowingly or no, when men pray, they will the object of their worship to assume a form that can better grant them their heart's desire. So they're primals in all but name, and of course they're the good primals who don't temper. Gaius should feel vindicated. He's been correct since ARR. I would say this was a nice callback, but I suspect it was completely unintended.
Are the 12 otherwise engaged? I was given to understand they were your protectors. Your gods are no different from those of the beasts. Icons, everyone.
If the 12 really are responsible for the stability of all of Aetheris, as they say, then every culture should be aware of them in some capacity, since they would have been shaped by the prayers and devotion of everyone on the star, not just Eorzeans. I know we're not supposed to think about it too hard, but if they never interfered, then how does anyone know about them enough to worship them, and to the extent that their godly forms relate so closely to their prior ancient occupations? Also, why do they act like Eorzea is the majority of mankind's population? What about the Far East and the rest of the world? Oh, right, they don't matter because the Chosen One hails from Eorzea. The Watcher says, yet even as they thus changed, at Venat's behest, they would have refrained from intervening in mortal affairs. So what was their point? According to him, it was to watch over things, but they weren't allowed to do anything if something happened. Venat's hubris is off the charts to make her followers all gods who proceed to do nothing except be worshipped all day. They didn't intervene with the 8th Umbral Calamity either, where presumably Venat's entire plan failed. I've seen it said that the 12 didn't exist to prevent calamities, they existed to help humanity through them when they inevitably occurred. Which, if true, further confirms Venat was complicit in every single one, because she told the 12 deities she created not to interfere by thwarting the Ascians, only to help after the damage was already done. It's more Hydaelyn fluff that still does nothing to help her case. All she did was create a bunch of useless simp effigies. It's literal idol worship now. I'm failing to see their purpose at all, just to exist for the sake of it, to be inspirational. They can't do anything, otherwise they'd be interfering. How did they manage to make the 12 this boring and useless? It would have been more interesting if Venat told them not to intervene, but they actively did try. Honestly, it just makes it seem like Hydaelyn was happy to let everyone murder indiscriminately in her name because it benefited her. They do nothing, they have no purpose, they don't even seem like they have their own personalities. You'd think gods would be bombastic, larger-than-life figures with personalities to match, but no, they're all approachable and mildly sunder at worst. It'd be one thing if just Menfina was a gentle sort, it'd fit her portfolio, but I suppose they didn't want to risk having any uncomfortable characters. Ultimately, they're all Hydaelyn creations, so they're all mirrors of her and her beliefs, no different than the Watcher or the Lawberates. It just completes the murder of their setting, and it's so deflating. Why did the 12 need to be linked to the Ancients at all, and in the most boring way possible? Why does everything need to be linked to Hydaelyn? Bit of a side rant, but why make new characters even choose a patron deity? They say this will not affect gameplay, but I know people who switched to Nald Thal because they thought they were surely going to be based on Emmet and Hith. Likewise, I know people who Fantasia'd just to change their deity from Azima when it looked like she was going to end up being Venat. It may not functionally affect gameplay, but I'd say it absolutely does for roleplay, or even just anyone who's ill at ease with what Hydaelyn and her followers did. I knew this would be a bad decision, and thought they'd be smart enough not to go there, choosing instead to have the 12 as manifestations of mankind's memories of the Ancients. This concept of you can say you love something and nothing else matters sure is something else. They do know that just saying "we love you" repeatedly isn't enough, right? You have to actually do things, and preferably not genocide like their creator. Good to see Zodiark did more for the planet than Venat's entire faction. I would say it's funny, though it's really not, that Zodiark tangibly protected the star for 12,000 years, while the 12 did nothing until the Warrior of Light appeared, wherein they immediately want to die in combat to them so they can, wait for it, return to the star. Oh my god. So they seek death when they feel they've achieved everything they could and their duty is fulfilled? You mean exactly what the Ancients used to do that was supposed to make them scary, and part of what caused Venat to be afraid of them becoming a dead end? Ashan outright says, "But this is what we've dreamed of, to return to the star together." A direct parallel to Hith's monologue in Elpis, but it's a well-deserved rest for the 12 though, of course. Eulogia says, yes, the fragments of our former souls which serve as the core of our existence shall rejoin the life stream. This was not a wholly unexpected backpedal. In fact, it was the retcon I expected them to make after realizing how bad it looked for Venat to have convinced her followers to soul death themselves over partial truths. However, this is retconning lore they wrote last year. Tales from the Dawn reads, Venat's faction thus resolved to manifest an entity capable of shackling that power. To have any chance at defeating the nigh-omnipotent Zodiarch, however, the sacrifice must be absolute. Not even their souls would remain. The Watcher also says, like myself, they were given shape from people who once existed. We know his soul was used absolutely as well. He's said as much himself. Also, per the Q&A, Zodiarch absorbed those who were sacrificed and was still able to maintain their souls within, whereas Hydaelyn did not have the leeway to preserve the souls of the summoners, including that of herself. Not only this, but releasing this essence of theirs into the life stream is said to give rise to new life. Quite how this is meant to bloom from mere soul fragments is a huge question mark. Eulogia says, when mankind overcame the final days, it so moved us that even we who were but constructs knew the greatest joy. I guess it didn't move them when their own people did it. Also, mankind didn't overcome them, the Warrior of Light did, like they always do. I feel I need to reiterate that the Warrior of Light is a god among men, whose achievements could only be accomplished by standing on the shoulders of ancients, and are certainly not representative of mankind as a whole, though the story likes to pretend they are. They're so important that not only did the people of the 8th Umbral Calamity timeline consider them the only person who could stop it, but name-dropping them as the reason to support their time travel expedition was the only way they were able to garner support for it. The mythos is essentially being destroyed so that you, the player character, can be a god. Whenever the Warrior of Light dies, Atheris is seemingly just screwed until their reincarnation is of age to take on the burdens of godhood. Derek mentions, in the wake of the calamity, my brethren and I were all occupied with our respective duties. Doing what? Explain. He also asks us about our opinion of the 12, our quote, words from the heart, but we're given no dialogue options, and after a cutscene Derek replies, the others will be glad to hear that, implying the Warrior of Light spoke positively about them, as we always do with anything related to Hydaelyn or the Sundering. We can't at a minimum question their morally dubious choices, either in life or in godhood, much less point out their hypocrisy. And I do have questions. Why did you join a divisive faction against the interests and will of the Star? Do you feel any remorse about having actively participated, knowingly or not, in the extinction of your own people? Why didn't you intervene with the calamities? Saying Venat told me not to is not an acceptable response. Then Kryl says, yet if the entire truth were to be revealed to the public, it would shake the very foundation of the worship of the 12. This is Venat here, they can't handle the truth. Meanwhile, Graha is no better. They both want to hide the origins of the 12 from the public and don't want people to know we killed their gods because they'd rightfully be upset. Didn't we have an entire expansion discussing how hiding religious information is bad? The reality is, this is how Venat and her disciples act. It was bad when Charlian hoarded knowledge, now it's for everyone's own good. Of course it's not bad in the case of anything involving Hydaelyn. Rules don't apply to her. Mankind must forge ahead, no more reliance on gods, but also don't tell anyone they're dead so people don't have to come to terms with their loss, and will continue praying to them as usual. I don't understand the obsession with destroying the mystique of the 12. It just proves to me they had no idea what to do with them, and the gods wouldn't need to be explained if they hadn't messed up with Hydaelyn. It doesn't make any sense, but trust in your loving mother. Another casualty of the dev's current fixation with obliterating any and all lingering threads from 2.0 to 6.0. It's such an anemic setting now. Even in Final Fantasy XII, the Ocuria from which Venat's namesake was derived were true gods who didn't die as much as lose their ability to influence the world, to disastrous effect for mankind over the longer haul. They can't keep the gods around because that means having to write around them, which is inconvenient. Given how much is being stripped away and bland-washed, we really are heading for a yawn trail. It's as Elizabeth said, and so it ends, in unceremonious silence. Oda seems to have thrown his hands up and given up completely in Endwalker. It's full rule of cool now, and by cool I mean the most predictable light love and friendship stuff and things being shaped like a plot. Honestly, it does seem like the lore team just stopped caring and let someone write their fan fiction as the plot instead, like a fan who played through the MSQ once and did no side content. I suppose the last thing left is the Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 3, and I expect it'll just reinforce the status quo. They don't seem to want to move from it one way or another, just vague, she loved you, and they're all tragic fluff. I really want to know how Endwalker is supposed to make sense as a whole. They hit us over the head for years with Louis Swah's quote, but all the good and heroic characters act counter to it. The game contradicts itself with greater frequency these days, which is frustrating as a former lore enthusiast. Last patch we got the classic, but a true hero would not damn another world to save his own, line from Zero. This patch, Astinian's the winner for saying, we rarely believe ourselves the villain, but if our ends demand unconscionable sacrifice, what else can we be? I also love how with the Void, it's just people who have to return their world to the way it was before. You know, the antithesis of the messaging of 6.0. I don't have much else to say about the MSQ, both because I don't care and because someone else has mentioned wanting to do a video on it. The final boss was a fusion dance, where apparently getting a Zodiark minion before Themis, which is a bit infuriating. I assume it was a begrudgingly made choice because they wanted to add a Hydaelyn minion. We also get portraits for all of Venat's followers, but still nothing for the 3 Unsundered other than the soulless one. Lastly, I can't help but comment on Derek saying, I was remade from the portion of my essence that wasn't returned to the star and will live out my days as a man. I don't even know how this is supposed to work. They're just making stuff up now and expecting everyone to go with it. I'd like to close with a post I saw on the forums by Virus about the Dark Knight quests, personal favorites of mine. Our Warrior of Light is supposed to and does have an inner turmoil because they know deep down they are not always making the morally upstanding choice. They kill people with incredible violence, rather often in fact, and they feel extreme amounts of guilt. This buried feeling externalizes itself during the Dark Knight questline, and the Warrior of Light's inner monologue is that their success in life is as a king whose throne is made of bones of everyone who stood in their way. They serve others to slay others. It's pretty dark. And as has been pointed out myriad times before, this is the kind of writing the game used to not shy away from. It used to bring real think pieces to the table. The story used to have stakes. It used to be a struggle. There were costs to saving the world. There were costs to doing the right thing. By taking the path of saviors and heroes, they paid dearly. Every cost to the heroes on our journey was referenced in Endwalker, and almost all of them were as old as Heaven's Ward. We're not asking to be the bad guys. We're asking to not be an unstoppable, morally supreme killing machine. We're asking for the cast and story to stop being woobified.